Previously on the Poppy Day bomb.
No stone shall be left unturned until we find the perpetrators of this.
This particular wall where people were standing would have been the one that fell out into the street on top of the spectators.
Will the Prime Minister request the extradition of Charles Cfield, living openly in the Irish Republic?
It's had an impact on you, more than you maybe realise yourself.
I don't know why the reading rooms wasn't searched. It's a vital question.
I think I was in London at the time when I heard about it. I got on a plane.
This is Peter Taylor. He's an award-winning journalist and veteran correspondent who reported on the Troubles for over 50 years for the BBC and ITN.
It's what Poppy Day stands for, about the loss of loved ones, families over the years. And to attack that, which was attended by innocent civilians, was just unthinkable, but it happened.
Peter is a quintessential English gentleman reporter. He closely scrutinises every question and thinks long and hard about his answers. It's fascinating to be sitting in front of him, not least because it was Peter's face that I remember so often on TV during my childhood, chronicling the madness going on around me.
I was in Enniskillen and talking to victims and people of the community on the evening after the bomb in the morning.
What was your reaction being there?
Shocked.
Why were you so shocked, Peter?
Because these things shouldn't happen. That's why. But they happen for political reasons going back a long way.
When Peter arrived in my hometown, news of something else would have been trickling in. Something which could have been even more shocking than the Enniskillen bomb. On the very same day as Enniskillen, the IRA had also targeted another Poppy Day parade. This was in the village of Tullyhomon, also in Fermanagh, about 20 miles away. This IRA bomb was 5 times bigger than the one that brought down the reading rooms, but it didn't detonate.
Little is known about it. It was sort of eclipsed by what happened in Enniskillen on the same day, and the bomb that the IRA planted in Tullyhomon was designed to go off slightly later in the day when there was a parade, as it happened, of young boys and girls, young men and women who were members of the Boys and presumably Girls Brigade organisation. If the bomb had gone off, and it was a huge bomb, many times larger than the Enniskillen bomb, the result would have been utterly devastating. That would have made Enniskillen look like a minor event.
When the island of Ireland was partitioned in 1922, this village was divided. The section which became part of Northern Ireland is known as Tullyhomon. The River Termon running through it became an international border. The bomb was hidden in a beer keg and plastic container close to an assembly point for the parade. A command wire measuring 136 metres and painted green for camouflage stretched back across the border into the Republic of Ireland. At least one IRA member stood beside a firing pack in the Republic, watching preparations for the parade. But when they pressed the button, nothing happened. But why was a double outrage on this scale planned in the first place? What drove the IRA to target Enniskillen and Tullyhomon? You're listening to the Poppy Day Bomb, a podcast series from The Times and The Sunday Times, with me, Mario Ledwith. This is part 3, the Borderlands. So the Remembrance Day attack could have been a double atrocity. This all happened as the IRA was executing its long war strategy. A relentless armed campaign against the British that would continue indefinitely. Alongside this would be the creation of a Republican political base, building support for Sinn Féin, the party whose aim was to achieve a united Ireland. A key plank of the IRA's military strategy was to orchestrate what they bleakly called spectaculars. These were bombs and killings that would grab press headlines, reminding people that the IRA was not going away. 3 years earlier, in 1984, they tried to assassinate the Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, in Brighton, targeting the Grand Hotel on the seafront during the Conservative Party conference.
The Irish Republican Army this morning made its most audacious and potentially devastating attack yet on the British government.
Shortly after the bomb went off, Mrs. Thatcher was taken away from the wrecked building, and on her way she spoke briefly to reporters.
Very well, thank you very much. Our worry is whether there's anyone under that rubble, because I don't know whether you've seen it, but it's pretty awful.
It didn't take long today for someone to take responsibility, and that was the Provisional IRA. A statement from Dublin this morning had a chill ring to it. Today, we were unlucky, but remember, we only have to be lucky once. You will have to be lucky always. Give Ireland peace, and there'll be no war.
Despite the attack, the conference went on, and this afternoon Mrs. Thatcher voiced the defiance and resolve which characterised the reaction of Tories in Brighton today.
It was an attempt not only to disrupt and terminate our conference, it was an attempt to...
Thatcher narrowly avoided harm, but 5 people did die, including an MP. The Brighton bombing was obviously a political target. As for Enniskillen and Tullyhammon, well, the geography of Fermanagh is really important to this story. Fermanagh is a largely rural county, and if you look at it on a map, it almost appears to jut into the Republic of Ireland. It's surrounded by the Republic, and it shares a border with 4 Irish counties: Monaghan, Cavan, Leitrim and Donegal. In the late 1980s, the area was less of a priority for British security forces, whose attention was focused on more violent areas, particularly urban centres like Belfast and Derry. The length of the border, twisting and turning over 300 miles, meant IRA units in the south could come into the north to launch attacks before quickly fleeing back to the relative safety of the Republic. Enniskillen is 11 miles from the border, and Tullyhammon is on it. So did the geography of these borderlands make them easy targets for an IRA spectacular?
How would you describe someone from Fermanagh? What type of characteristics do they have?
People from Fermanagh are very gentle people, very talkative people, very intrigued people who... To really get a sense of the place, I've brought Will, the producer on this podcast series, to experience the borderlands. How this partition line, drawn a century ago, snakes through the fields, bogs and hills in the north of Ireland. It's a grey and gloomy day, but at least there's no rain, which is always a blessing in this part of the world. We are currently driving through County Cavan. We're approaching the Woodford River, which also serves as a marker, an invisible marker almost, for the border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Now we're in the south, and now we are in the north. That's it. No fanfare, and we are now in the United Kingdom. And growing up, for me, what was really interesting was along those border points, you would have actually had militarised zones. You would have had military checkpoints run by the British Army. And I have vivid memories of being a child driving through Northern Ireland towards the south and being about to cross into the Republic of Ireland. This was still at a time when the Troubles was alive. I remember looking out the window, guns trained on your car. In front of you, there'd be a checkpoint, militarised tower, and it served ultimately as a processing point, checking cars, and it was just an incredible spectre.
Was every car pulled over? What was it like?
I think it ultimately depended on where you were going. Often we would drive down to Donegal to go to the seaside for the weekend, and I remember vividly just outside of Donegal there was one checkpoint, and we always got pulled over on a Friday night. Maybe it was busy, but yeah, they'd check the boot, ask for my dad and my mum's driving licence, roll down the window, and yeah, that was part of life.
normal.
How old were you?
At that time, I was just a little nipper.
And in terms of this podcast series, obviously, back in 1987, you know, it's around here, I guess, well, just before we got over the border, that's where the IRA would have been getting bombs into position and then target whatever they were targeting.
Yeah, these borderlands were a key operating zone for the IRA, basically because of the jurisdictional differences. So in Northern Ireland, police, British Army had jurisdiction to track, to monitor, to arrest, to carry out security operations against paramilitary groups like the IRA. Once they go over that border, then becomes a Republic of Ireland issue. And that was something that the IRA was acutely aware of, and that's why they tended to, when they were outside of Belfast, Derry, their strongholds and cities, they would have bases in places like rural Fermanagh, the north of Monaghan, places that had properties that often straddled the border, one half of your farm in the north, one half of your farm in the south. It posed a logistical challenge for the authorities, and it was something that the IRA was very, very good at exploiting.
Growing up, Enniskillen had a reputation as a tolerant, socially mixed, and even cultured town. The writers Oscar Wilde and Samuel Beckett came to school here. It wasn't known for paramilitary violence, although of course everywhere during the Troubles could be vulnerable, and being within 20 minutes of the border meant, in 1987, Enniskillen became a target. The bomb was made in the Republic and brought into Fermanagh 2 days before the explosion. It was then kept in a safe house in the Enniskillen area until being transported into the reading rooms. I've been told by a police source that, in all likelihood, one member of the IRA placed the bomb and primed it, while another would have kept lookout. So what, if any, evidence is there linking IRA suspects with Enniskillen that weekend? Were any seen in the area at the time? Remarkably, there's never been a public inquiry or a conclusive fact-finding investigation into what happened. So I've spent months trawling through anything and everything I could get my hands on. And I was surprised to find there are records of some suspicious sightings.
Yeah, we've got these 8 arrests.
Series producer Will and I talked it through.
There were people suspected of this at the time, and there's one of them which is a man with a limp.
The man with the limp, I'm not sure if we can authoritatively call him a suspect at this stage. But yes, we've seen a draft police report carried out by what was called the Historical Inquiries Team, a now defunct police body that looked at atrocities from the Troubles and tried to come up with some answers. And it's one of the more eye-catching sections in there. There's an eyewitness account.
Yeah.
Who said he was in the reading rooms on the night before the bomb, when we know that a game of bingo was taking place and later some men were playing cards in the basement. And this man says he comes across a man with a limp, wearing a pinstripe suit, seemingly in his 40s, who was in the building and carrying what looked like a heavy bag.
The report reads, Witness E was a local man. He went to the reading rooms about 9 p.m. and went into the basement room. He left the basement about 10 minutes later. He entered the hallway and his account continues. And this is the quote. So this is Witness E. He says, I met a man who was wearing a darkish pinstripe suit. He was about 40-ish and had a limp. That's all I remember. I've never seen him before. He was also carrying a blue plastic bag that looked heavy. I didn't talk to him and just left.
It's
curious, isn't it?
I think this stands out to me because it's so specific.
Yeah.
And if we take the report, the draft report, this was never published, but this sighting is really one of the very few bits of specific detail in the entire report, which makes me think it's been included for a reason.
Yeah.
This is a lead.
Yeah.
The police must have been
intrigued by this.
It's also put someone in the building on the night, i.e. someone in the reading rooms.
Yes, and the bag detail is interesting because we believe the bomb was placed inside a bag, a hold-all, a sports bag, as it's been described in the reading rooms. And the reference to this man carrying a heavy bag, it's pointing you in a certain direction. It's raising suspicion.
And then in this same report that we've got here, because this is kind of a cold case review, is that fair to say?
Yep,
something along those lines. A few pages later, so witness E, who's been given this anonymity. But there's this another bit now where the report says that he was shown photographs of suspected local terrorists.
What happens after this man comes forward actually shines a light on some of the deficiencies in the police investigation that others have spoken about. The police then naturally have to try and work out, well, who was that man? What do the police do? They show him a number of photographs of local Republicans.
Yeah, the wording they use in the report is photographs of suspected local terrorists.
So this is obviously highly controversial and is actually criticised elsewhere in the report because they are
sort of leading a witness.
Effectively leading into him identifying one of a group of people they already think are suspects, rather than trying to qualify this by putting in people who are completely separate to this, who might not be from the area, just photographs of random people. They're basically saying, here's a number of people who are already on our radar. Can you pick somebody out for us?
Yeah.
And what does he do? He picks 2 people. But the report makes the point that that is not good police practice.
Yes. In 2006, what is now the PSNI, the Police Service of Northern Ireland, they sort of tried to resolve this issue and they re-interview Witness E in 2006. And this throws up even more issues because suddenly it says Witness E was unable to remember speaking to the police, making a statement or viewing photographs. And he stated, so this is Witness E, that he suffered from severe memory loss and he can't remember any of this. You know, it doesn't mean he didn't make the sighting back in 87.
Yeah, the HUT comes to the conclusion that the information that this man came with is now unreliable.
There's little else I can find on that reported sighting. However, whoever the witness identified, we know from the report that they were not arrested. But I've been talking to people on the ground in Enniskillen, and I think I know who this man is. At least it fits the profile of a known local Republican living in the area at the time. He's an interesting character. He didn't exactly fly under the radar, and he was very much known to the local police and to the security services more widely. He's someone I want to talk to. More on that later. There was something else I came across while investigating this story. It jumped out at me. There were reports of IRA suspects from the Republic being seen in Enniskillen that very weekend.
You've managed to get hold of some other documents, legal ones.
In 2015, a small group of families put together a submission to the Attorney General in Northern Ireland asking to reopen the inquest. It was ultimately unsuccessful, but in the documents there are accounts from 2 police officers. Second-hand accounts, yes, but they're pretty eye-catching.
And there's a couple of sightings there. Can we just go through those?
The first involves a serving RUC officer at the time,
right,
from Enniskillen, who was actually waiting outside the reading rooms for his wife, who was inside the building playing a game of bingo.
The bingo night.
Lots of people were in there playing bingo. So this police officer says he's waiting in the car and he observes a number of individuals who he knew as Republicans from County Monaghan, just over the border from Fermanagh in the Republic of Ireland. This police officer said he recognised the individuals as leading IRA figures.
Right.
He said that he observed the individuals going into the building, including one who was a woman wearing a green dress and carrying a brown bag.
Wow.
Now, this officer says, according to this document, that he made a written report to the police investigation team in Enniskillen's police station, and that no significant interest was shown in his account thereafter by those in the police investigation team. If this is all correct, obviously that's a crucial bit of information. It raises serious questions.
And Mario, is there another alleged sighting that you've got?
Well, what's even more intriguing is that, according to this legal document, another police officer has spoken to some victims about a similar account on the night before the bomb.
So there's another police officer?
Very curiously, there is another police officer supposedly in the vicinity of the reading rooms who is off duty and in his private vehicle, close to a dentist surgery, just opposite the entrance to the reading rooms. And this person says he also observes suspected terrorists who he knew by name entering and coming out of the reading rooms.
And what does he do with this information?
This person says, and now this is secondhand because it's in an account to one of the victims who's making a legal application, that he gave a 4-page statement outlining his observations to the local police, and that he was never spoken to about the statement that he submitted. It's worth remembering that at the time there were masses and masses of information and intelligence swishing and swashing about in Northern Ireland. Extensive sightings, alleged sightings, movements, all of this stuff was being outlined all the time to police, to the security services. And in hindsight, we can always retrofit it.
One has to remember that during the Troubles, a local police officer sees a suspected IRA person. Just because you see someone that, you know, maybe a bit of a nefarious character walking around in the centre of Enniskillen, well, that's not a criminal offence.
It's not at all, but I would raise the point that one of these police officers says the suspected Republicans he had seen were from County Monaghan. If you've got guys coming from across the border
from Monaghan
on a weekend when there was a heightened security situation, well, then that is more suspicious. I wanted to talk to the Police Service of Northern Ireland about the original investigation into the bombing and the subsequent reviews. They said that they are now prohibited by law from commencing or continuing any Troubles-related criminal investigations from this period, and that the Independent Commission for Reconciliation and Information Recovery is the only body with the power to review the deaths at Enniskillen. Therefore, they added, we are mindful to not say or do anything that could compromise a future case. Those sightings on the night of the bombing were all by the Northern Irish Police Force, but police south of the border in the Republic were also keeping tabs, and I found some of their reports mentioned in the same unpublished cold case review. We can sometimes slightly forget that the police in the south also had quite a significant intelligence operation focused on the IRA and what the IRA was up to. In the curious way that things worked during the Troubles, the police in Northern Ireland and the police in the Republic of Ireland didn't automatically share all of their information with each other.
It is two different jurisdictions, I guess.
Two different jurisdictions. But sometime after the Enniskillen bombing, intelligence is passed along the chain to police in the north from their counterparts in the south, and they say that 2 men had been arrested. They were both suspected provisional IRA terrorists, as a document refers to them, and they were released due to there being insufficient evidence to charge them with a criminal offence.
Do you know when those arrests were made?
The document doesn't give a date, and very interestingly, there is a caveat in the report that says the Garda, that's the police in the Republic of Ireland, now have no record of these arrests.
Right.
These reports have been fascinating to read. It feels like I've been reaching back through time, almost 40 years, getting a sense of the troubles and policing around my hometown when I was a child. But frustratingly, it doesn't really get me any closer to the bombers and what drove them. Although there is just one more thing to tell you. It's from an article in the Irish Times in 1997, a decade after the massacre. This says that the Irish police arrested 3 suspected IRA men in Monaghan on the morning of the bomb, and that a woman, believed to be the leader of the South Fermanagh Brigade of the IRA, was also understood to have arrived in Monaghan that very morning. According to the report, a group of 8 Republicans were detected in Monaghan. The subsequent intelligence assessment was that they had all been involved with Enniskillen. There's no more detail. We don't know if or when this was passed to the police in the north. It just shows how difficult it was to police terror groups and solve crimes without full cooperation between the British and Irish. This was a common theme throughout the Troubles. Intelligence isn't evidence, of course. For that, there needs to be corroboration. And intelligence can be tainted, sources obscured, gained in unclear circumstances, and it's rarely tested in court. But intelligence is often all there was in the Troubles. And remember Charles Cfield from episode 2, named in Parliament as the alleged mastermind behind the bombing. The basis for that claim has never been explained, but it almost certainly came from the security services. Whoever it was that targeted Enniskillen, there's still the bewildering question of why they decided on such a brutal attack. During this investigation, I have heard one explanation though, which might throw some light on that. "12 people were ultimately killed by the Poppy Day attack. Had the bomb planted at Tullyhammon also exploded, it could have been dozens more." Republican sympathisers were appalled. It led to a backlash from IRA supporters, as well as funders. Any event to honour the war dead would be seen as sacrosanct by many in both communities. Were the IRA aware of the risk of civilian deaths? Journalist Peter Taylor thinks so.
I did talk to the RUC intelligence officer who investigated Enniskillen, and he said it was clear from the documentation he'd seen, which I assume was transcripts of meetings which had been secretly recorded by MI5 or Special Branch or whatever. He said the IRA discussed what was the acceptable limit of civilian deaths or casualties that could be tolerated. So, and I believe that would have been part of the discussion.
So it's not total ignorance to the fact that civilians may have died.
No.
There was a weighing up.
I understand from my source that there was a calculation, and I think there would have been, because it would never make sense to deliberately set out to kill and maim so many innocent civilians. From the IRA's point of view, if they were military or security force, police or whatever, that was all part of the long war. But to actually, apparently, to target innocent civilians and Protestant Unionist civilians too, was simply not something that I think thinking members of the IRA leadership would have been comfortable with.
If it wasn't a decision by the IRA leadership, could the operation have been instigated by a local unit? And was it driven by something else? As I've been talking to former IRA members and sympathisers for this investigation, I've been asking this question, and one explanation has come up again and again.
There's something about this may actually have been fueled by revenge?
Yeah. We have to look at what was happening in the borderlands surrounding Fermanagh just a few months before the Enniskillen bombing, one of the most notorious incidents of the Troubles unfolds in a place called Loughgall in County Armagh.
The tiny village of Loughgall, with its devastated police station, was sealed off today as forensic officers picked their way carefully through the debris of last night's battle. It's clear that when the mechanical digger carrying a bomb in the shovel drove up to the station escorted by a van containing 6 armed men, they had driven straight into a security forces ambush.
This was the Republican movement's biggest single loss of life. It was down to the SAS, who were lying in wait for an entire IRA unit and wiped out all 8 of them. At that time, the increasing use of the SAS by Margaret Thatcher's government, by the British authorities, was highly controversial. The Republicans didn't like it. They thought they were being targeted unfairly, which seems incredible to think about at the time, but there was controversy about what they called a shoot-to-kill policy. So could they not have just arrested these IRA men rather than lying in wait and gunning them down? After Loughgall, the amount of cartridges on the ground was described as being like confetti at a wedding. They fired over 1,000 rounds at these guys.
They essentially say that Enniskillen was actually a revenge attack for Loughgall. It was that simple. They'd been whacked by the SAS, so they have to hit back in their mind.
Of course, the IRA was going to respond to this. They weren't just going to take this. It's what some Republicans have told us.
I guess it felt maybe personal. It's a very underpopulated area. The IRA units are small, so everyone knows each other. So these are ultimately people's friends and comrades as they see it in the movement.
Well, if we think of the idea of revenge, it possibly acts in opposition to cold, hard strategy, which is what, when people are praising the IRA, they often say it was one of its virtues. It was very tactically astute. Enniskillen was the very opposite of a tactical triumph. It was a disaster. So how did it happen? Some things crept in to mess things up, and that very well may have been revenge. On our travels around Fermanagh and the bordering counties in the south, I'd picked up on some rumours about the location of Charles Cfield, the alleged mastermind behind the bombing, something he's always denied. I'd heard he could be back living in the Republic, having moved to the United States in 1989, New York specifically. The US government tried to prosecute him for an offence that could have led to his deportation in the 90s. They failed. But it was time to see if the rumours that he is back are true.
Yeah, I can barely see the car in front of us. It's that bad.
On a very rainy day, Will and I set off for the village of Scottstown in Monaghan, just over the border, where Cfield grew up. There's nothing legally to stop him coming back, and he's under no obligation to talk to us, but he's not been an easy man to find.
Do you think at this point Charlie Cfield will be aware of your investigation in the loosest terms?
I don't know. I mean, we're making inquiries, and I would imagine that it doesn't take long for that sort of news to travel. We are trying to get a message to him through a contact, just to say, we're interested in speaking and meeting up. We're waiting to hear back on that. There's a few things moving. We pulled over just on the outskirts, about a mile away.
Have you ever been into Scottstown before?
I've never been here before, no. It's not somewhere I think you'd just stop by.
Actually, just standing here now, it's really beautiful, very peaceful, gorgeous, green, rolling country fields.
This landscape's quite interesting and quite symbolic of the Troubles. This is where a lot of the guys were operating in these small rural communities, quite close to the border. We know of a number of prominent IRA figures who were located around here in the 70s and 80s. I guess that violence in this kind of peacetime feels slightly incongruous. It's a pretty bucolic scene. It's not something we would associate with,
subversive activity that resulted in a lot of people being killed. So we're just coming into Scottstown village itself now. It's very quiet. There's a bank of terraced houses here on the left.
There wasn't much to Scottstown. By the time you'd driven in, you'd already driven out. It was one of those kind of places. But right in the middle was a memorial to the Easter Uprising in Dublin, the armed rebellion against British rule which took place in 1916.
Some of those who were shot dead and obviously became kind of martyrs to the Republican movement, some of the most famous figures in Republicanism. It's interesting that it's pride of place, doesn't it, on the village green.
But otherwise, it was like any rural village.
It's got the essentials: a pharmacist, a hairdresser, 2 pubs, crucially, a chip shop, a chipper, and quite a few houses, and that's about it.
Now, as a journalist looking for someone, I'd usually start asking around in a few key places, check some local information, maybe knock on some doors. But because Scottstown is so small, and because it's still a strongly Republican area, our security team advised us not to. I wouldn't go as far as to say I feel any hostility, but it's fairly clear that asking about IRA activity might not generate the warmest response, and there are few events as sensitive as Enniskillen. So we drove on.
Actually, on the brow of a hill up here to our right is a property which is linked to the Cfield family. Some clothes on the line and a tractor out the back. And actually just on round the bend, there is another property. This one looks a bit worn down and out of action. There's a hole in the roof there and the gate's rusted. Certainly doesn't look like that's been lived in for quite some time. There's a barn out the back and some farm buildings, but yeah, it looks...
We left the village and took the road to Monaghan town, a 10 or 15 minute drive. I had an address for Charles Cfield, which I'd found in some newspaper clippings from the 80s. It was a long shot, but worth a go. We parked up and I got out. It was a narrow town centre street with plenty of people milling about. The door I want opened straight onto the pavement. Was I about to come face to face with the alleged mastermind? I knocked. No answer. A few moments later, a neighbour popped out. He told me, "No one's living there, lad."
You don't know how to get hold of him? Or...
He did confirm the house is owned by a Cfield, so I gathered still in the family, but not Charles or Charlie.
Is that Charlie?
It was always a long shot, but it still felt a bit deflating. Maybe Cfield has returned to New York. Maybe he's never been back and we've got the wrong end of the stick. After a few more inquiries, we'd pretty much run out of leads. But while driving back to Enniskillen, one of the calls I'd put out to chase up those rumours came in. The contact had an update from me. I relayed it to Will.
And he says fairly definitively, that man doesn't want to be found, which is an interesting way of putting it. I think what he means to say is Charlie Cfield hasn't been seen around here in a hell of a long time. And he also referenced the fact that, look, he's understood to still be living in New York. He was seen at a function, a GAA function, that's the Gaelic sports in Ireland function, some years ago in New York. And locally, according to this source, that's really the last anybody's heard of him. According to this source, and contradictory to what we had been told or heard on the grapevine, it seems like Charlie Cfield never did come back to Ireland and has spent more than 30 years living in New York, having moved there in the late 80s.
So the next step was to try and find an address for Charlie Cfield in New York. I asked a colleague at the Times who was based there to make some inquiries. In the meantime, I tried a phone number I had for a property in the city that was linked to Cfield.
Hello. Please leave a message.
Okay, look. Try again later. Let's see if he picks up this time.
Hello.
No answer once again.
Hello.
No dice. But my colleague in New York did find Cfield. He went to an address and a neighbour confirmed to him that Cfield was indeed living there. It was satisfying to at last track him down, but Cfield wasn't at home, so we delivered a letter. In it, I asked if he would do an interview. We put to Cfield the allegation made in Parliament in 1987 that he was the alleged mastermind behind the Enniskillen bomb, and asked why he moved to the States. Charlie Cfield never got back to me. Maybe that's not surprising, but having finally found him, it was disappointing all the same. In this episode, I've come to better understand what may have motivated the IRA to bomb Enniskillen. But as for the individuals involved, the IRA members who did the planning and those who actually left the bomb in the reading rooms, I still feel the answers to those questions are just out of reach. On a summer's day earlier this year, I walked down a residential street. I stopped at a house and paused for a moment. Then I gathered myself and walked into the front garden. And standing there looking at me was a man on the phone. It was the man with the limp. That's next time on the Poppy Day Bomb. You've been listening to the Poppy Day Bomb, a podcast series from The Times and The Sunday Times, with me, Mario Ledwith. It's written by me and Will Rowe. The series producer is Will Rowe. Additional producing on this episode by Kate Lamble. Additional reporting on this episode by Will Pavia, The Times' New York correspondent. The executive producer is Lynn Jones. Original music and sound design is by Tom Burchill. The commissioning editor is Kate Ford. And the head of podcasts at The Times is Dan Box. We're continuing to investigate this story and will report more if we get new leads. If you have any tips or information that you want to share with me or the team, you can email confidentially. You'll find contact details in the description notes.